There's something very specific about this dynamic that's difficult to explain unless you've experienced it. It's not always loud, it's not always obvious, and sometimes very little even happens externally. But for some reason, these connections tend to leave a strong psychological impression on both people. And when a Scorpio sun encounters a Scorpio moon, the connection can start feeling emotionally charged before either person fully understands why. So, in this video, I want to talk about why this dynamic affects people so deeply, what both placements tend to notice about each other almost immediately, and why these connections can become very difficult to emotionally ignore once they begin. Chapter 1: The Recognition Phase. One thing I've noticed about Scorpio energy in general is that it tends to recognize itself very quickly, especially when it comes to emotional depth. And with a Scorpio sun and Scorpio moon connection, there's often this strange sense that both people immediately know the other person is not entirely surface level. It may not even begin with conversation. Sometimes it's more in the atmosphere between them, eye contact that lingers a little too long, silence that somehow doesn't feel empty, feeling of curiosity that neither person can fully explain. Because both placements are naturally observant. Scorpio suns tend to watch people carefully before revealing themselves. They often have a strong awareness of power dynamics, hidden motives, emotional undercurrents, even if they don't openly talk about it. But Scorpio moons observe emotionally. They tend to pick up on what people are suppressing, hiding, or trying to control internally. A Scorpio moon can sometimes sense emotional contradictions in people almost immediately. And this is where the recognition starts happening. Chapter 2: Why the Scorpio Sun Becomes Drawn In. I think one reason Scorpio suns become deeply affected by Scorpio moon energy is because Scorpio suns are often used to maintaining some level of emotional control over how others perceive them. Even when they are emotionally intense internally, they usually don't reveal everything at once. There's often a level of restraint, privacy, or emotional self protection. Scorpio suns tend to understand that once people truly see your vulnerabilities, they can potentially use them against you. So, over time, many Scorpio suns become very skilled at controlling what they show people. But Scorpio moon energy can disrupt that because Scorpio moons often don't just listen to words, they observe emotional inconsistencies, body language, shifts in energy, silence, avoidance, emotional tension. They tend to notice what a person's trying not to say. And I think that can make Scorpio sun feel unusually exposed around them. Not necessarily in a negative way at first, but definitely in a way that feels unfamiliar. Because a Scorpio sun may suddenly realize this person sees more than I intended them to. And for Scorpio energy, being emotionally understood can feel almost as intimate as romance itself, especially because Scorpio suns are not always looking for people who simply admire them. A lot of people can admire Scorpio energy from a distance, but what Scorpio suns often secretly crave is someone who understands the emotional complexity underneath the exterior, the parts they don't openly show. Chapter 3: Why the Scorpio Moon Gets Attached. Now, on the other side of this dynamic, I think Scorpio moons can become deeply attached to Scorpio suns because Scorpio moons are rarely satisfied by shallow emotional connections. Scorpio moon energy tends to crave emotional depth, intensity, authenticity, something that feels psychologically real. And Many Scorpio moons spend a large part of their lives feeling emotionally misunderstood or emotionally guarded themselves, even if they appear calm externally. There's usually a very deep internal world underneath that most people never fully access. So when they encounter a Scorpio sun, they often sense emotional weight immediately, not necessarily because the Scorpio sun is expressive, but because Scorpio suns tend to carry emotional intensity in a very visible yet controlled way. There's often mystery there, emotional restraint, depth beneath composure, and Scorpio moons are naturally drawn toward trying to understand what exists underneath that surface, especially because Scorpio moon energy tends to become fascinated by complexity. The more emotionally layered someone feels, the more the Scorpio moon may start mentally and emotionally studying them. And what's interesting is that Scorpio moons often don't attach loudly at first. A lot of the attachment can happen internally. Quiet observation, thinking about the person repeatedly, analyzing interactions afterward, noticing small emotional shifts, becoming emotionally invested without openly admitting it. Because Scorpio moon energy tends to experience emotions very deeply, but also very privately. Chapter 4, the emotional mirror effect. And I think this is the point where the connection often starts becoming truly transformative for both people. Because eventually, the Scorpio Sun and Scorpio Moon stop simply observing each other and start unconsciously mirroring each other. And Scorpio energy is already deeply tied to themes of shadow, vulnerability, control, fear, emotional exposure, and transformation. So, when two people with strong Scorpio energy interact closely, they often end up triggering parts of each other that are usually kept hidden. The Scorpio sun may begin noticing emotional reactions within themselves that feel difficult to control around the Scorpio moon. Meanwhile, the Scorpio moon may start realizing that the Scorpio sun is activating emotional wounds, desires, insecurities, or obsessions they normally keep buried. And what makes this dynamic so intense is that both people usually sense this happening, even if nobody openly talks about it. That's why Scorpio to Scorpio dynamics can sometimes feel emotionally loud without much actually being expressed externally. A simple interaction can linger in both people's minds for hours. Silence can feel loaded. Distance can feel intentional. Eye contact can feel intimate. Withdrawal can feel personal. Because both people are extremely sensitive to emotional undercurrents, especially once attachment begins forming. And I think one of the biggest struggles in this connection is that both individuals often want emotional closeness while simultaneously fearing the vulnerability that comes with it. So you can end up with this push pull dynamic where both people feel drawn in, both people become emotionally affected, but both people are also trying to maintain some form of emotional control, which can create power struggles that aren't always obvious externally. Sometimes the struggle isn't about dominance in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's about who reveals more, who withdraws first, who becomes more emotionally affected, who maintains composure longer. And because Scorpio energy tends to fear betrayal or emotional loss very deeply. Both people may become hyper aware of protecting themselves emotionally while also becoming increasingly consumed by the connection itself. That's why these dynamics can become psychologically exhausting at times because both people may quietly sense this person has the ability to affect me more deeply than I'm comfortable with. Chapter 5, The Dangerous Side of This Connection. While Scorpio Sun and Scorpio Moon dynamics can feel deeply intimate and emotionally transformative, they can also become psychologically consuming if both people are not self aware, especially because Scorpio energy tends to intensify whatever emotional bond already exists. So, if the connection is healthy, honest, and emotionally mature, it can feel deeply healing. But if there's avoidance, fear, emotional repression, mixed signals, or control issues involved, the connection can slowly turn into emotional obsession, hyperfixation, or silent emotional warfare. And I think one reason this happens is because neither placement handles emotional vulnerability lightly. Both Scorpio suns and Scorpio moons tend to remember emotional experiences very intensely. They replay interactions mentally and they analyze shifts in behavior. They notice emotional distance immediately. So once tension enters the connection, both people may start reading deeply into everything: silence, tone changes, delayed responses, eye contact, withdrawal, emotional inconsistency. Things that other people might overlook can start feeling emotionally significant to Scorpio energy. And instead of directly expressing vulnerability, both people may begin testing each other emotionally instead, trying to see, do they care as much as I do? Are they affected too? Who has more emotional control here? Which can create cycles of withdrawal and fixation at the same time. Chapter 6, Why These Connections Linger. I think one of the most defining things about Scorpio Sun and Scorpio Moon connections is that they often linger emotionally long after the interaction itself has changed or ended, because Scorpio energy tends to leave emotional residue. These are usually not the kinds of connections where both people simply forget each other and move on emotionally untouched. Even if life continues normally on the outside, internally, there can still be reflection, replaying memories, wondering what the connection actually meant. Especially because so much of the intensity between these two placements often exists beneath the surface. A lot may remain unspoken, a lot may stay implied, a lot may be felt rather than directly expressed. And strangely, that can sometimes make the connection even harder to fully release because unresolved emotional intensity tends to stay alive in the mind longer. The Scorpio sun may continue thinking about how emotionally seen they felt around the Scorpio moon. The Scorpio moon may continue revisiting the emotional depth and psychological pull they experience with the Scorpio sun. And since both placements tend to attach through emotional significance rather than surface interaction, the connection can continue lingering internally even during long periods of silence or separation. Scorpio energy has a tendency to mentally revisit experiences that felt transformative, not necessarily because they want to remain stuck in the past, but because Scorpio is naturally connected to themes of emotional meaning, psychological depth, and transformation through intense experiences. So, when a connection affects them deeply enough, they often continue trying to understand it long afterward, trying to figure out what exactly was that? Why did this person affect me so much? Why does this still feel emotionally present? And in many cases, both people may quietly sense that the connection changed them in some way, even if they never openly discuss it. Because Scorpio to Scorpio dynamics often aren't just about attraction, they're about emotional exposure, about recognizing parts of yourself through another person. And once Scorpio energy feels truly seen at that level, it can become very difficult to completely forget the person who made them feel that way. Closing. When Scorpio recognizes itself. That's ultimately what makes Scorpio Sun and Scorpio Moon connections so difficult to fully move on from. It's not always about what happened externally between the two people. A lot of the intensity exists underneath the surface in what was felt, understood, sensed, or silently recognized. Because when Scorpio energy encounters someone who can truly see beneath the mask, the connection often stops feeling casual very quickly. And whether the relationship grows, fades, or remains unresolved, both people usually walk away knowing they encountered someone who affected them far more deeply than expected.